Sorry about that, babe.
Alright, continuing on by ripping through the old school FromSoftware backlog, a recent poll winner and that of EverGrace on the Sony PlayStation 2 is the next game to play and cover. I recently live streamed it, completing the base game and tinkering around offline a little bit with the secret side dungeon. If you want to check out the playthrough, I'll link it in the pinned comment description and end screen for you. EverGrace is a single-player action RPG that was developed by FromSoftware and published in North America by Agetec, released on the Sony PS2 as a launch title on October 26 in the year 2000. It's actually pretty cool to see FromSoftware have so much launch activity with that of EverGrace, Armored Core 2, and Eternal Ring amongst a slew of other games that were released. Quick note before we get into the review, the footage that you're seeing is actually from the New Game Plus run, if you will. Since I live streamed it originally, I had my ugly mug all over the footage and I wanted to record some quote clean footage without my camera. So yeah, you might be wondering how I'm decked out in OP gear so early in the game. That's why. Gotta do what you gotta do for the review. The story. The game takes place on the continent of Edinburgh, specifically in the Rubian Empire. The ruler of said empire is this chucklehead, googly-eyed magician named Morpheus, who became devoted to studying the crest. In this world, the crest signifies a curse leading to misfortunes for the crest bearers. Pretty Dark Souls 2-y if you ask me, but anyway. There's some more backstory in the manual and it's readily available online if you want a bit more of a lore dive, but let's zip forward to the present day to our heroes Darius and Charlene. Darius, a young man from Solta, bears the crest on his right hand. His parents were murdered by an invading army and it was thought to be in direct correlation to the crest. From that point forward, Darius was only concerned with vengeance. During his vengeance quest, he discovered a Biliana tree that opened a door to a world that was unimaginable. Darius was greeted by Chrysalis, lore dumped about the Lost Empire, and thus began his journey to learn the meaning of the crest and to find his way. Charlene, essentially a sister to Darius, lived with him and his family, knowing of the crest on Darius's right hand. Seemingly out of the blue, Charlene was transported to the same different world and immediately was greeted by another girl who was in fear of being kidnapped. Much like Darius, Charlene is now set off to uncover the mysteries and return to her own world. While the dialogue delivery in-game may be lacking at best, the story is actually quite interesting as it progresses. There were also actually 2 Japanese-only novelizations of EverGrace. Apparently it deviates from the game's plot a little bit, but I found it interesting that they went so hard into this title, clearly making it a launch title for the PS2, but also having novelizations and of course the upcoming series prequel that I hope to cover at some point in the near future, and that of Forever Kingdom. Graphics. With EverGrace being a PS2 launch title, I think it's fair to temper your expectations a bit as developers were still kind of figuring out the full power of the, at the time, upcoming console, the PS2. With that said, EverGrace's graphics are pretty good and help add greatly to the wild, wacky, and janky world of the Rubian Empire. The Royal Commons and Serenade Hill areas, for example, towards the beginning of the game are very memorable and vibrant, oftentimes reminding me of World of Warcraft areas like Durotar, but with a bit more of an alien flair. The character models of both Darius and Charlene are quite memorable as well, especially that of Darius. Dude had all the pizzazz of somebody destined to be a PS2 mascot. A similar character model appeared in fellow launch title Eternal Ring, the guy that you encounter a couple times, but namely in the Limestone Cave. Kinda looks like Darius down in the dumps after hitting the weights and creatine for a little while. Many of the enemy designs are pretty unique as well, lots of cool bosses. Sure, you have your traditional slime enemies, but then you also have enemies like the Ageless Wanderer, Arachne, and Ritualist that could be plucked right out of Shadow Tower, Kingsfield, or Eternal Ring. The game also has an interesting gimmick of changing the sizes of the enemy types to lend itself to some more extra variety. For example, there will be some small, medium, and large versions of the enemies. I'd also be remiss if I did not mention the wide variety of weapons and armor in EverGrace. Everything shows as it should on your character model and really leans into that upcoming FromSoft staple of fashion souls, which I'll touch on in a bit in a future section. The UI of the game is also quite crisp and easy to navigate. All in all, the graphics of EverGrace aren't groundbreaking by any means, but I would say they are more than sufficient and they're unique. The more you play, the more you look at it, the game just reeks of EverGrace. Music and sound. Oh boy, let's quickly touch on the sound design first. The swanging and banging of the melee, the various Palmyra actions, and even the footsteps of your heroes, they're all adequate enough and lend itself well to the overall presentation. But the meat here is the music and, yeah. Composer Kota Hoshino, who worked on a bunch of FromSoft titles and a few prior to EverGrace, put together one of the most interesting soundtracks of all time. I'm not kidding. I think interesting is the correct word here because I'm not quite sure if it's bad or good. I actually saw this comment on an EverGrace OST track YouTube video the other day and I wanted to share it here because it pretty much sums up how I feel. The soundtrack of this game intrigues me. My brain can't decide whether to love it or hate it. At times I was really feeling it, and other times I actually felt that it was too chaotic, sporadic, and janky to be even remotely enjoyable. Even at times it would grate on me and I just want to get out of that area that I was in. Some highlighted examples of that include the title screen. I feel like this track perfectly exemplifies what's to come in EverGrace. It's sorta catchy, chaotic as could be, and possibly even annoying at times if you hear it for too long. Then you have the track Sunbeams Streaming Through the Trees on the Hill from the early game, which deviates a bit, but to me somehow makes the chaotic nature very peaceful, relaxing, and dare I say a good listen. The same could be said for the Merchant theme, Buying Goods with Palmyra. It's one of my favorite tracks of the game. The atmospheric romps are some of my favorites as well, such as that of the Sounds of the Cavern track and Castle of Regression. Then on the other hand, you have some super chaotic tracks such as Howl, which is basically the boss theme, and Red Breeze, which is in that lava area. For a brief moment it sounds something straight out of Beavis and Butthead on the SNES, I'm not kidding. I don't really know what to say about the OST beyond this. I feel like this is truly a love it or hate it type of deal. Genuinely, I feel like there's no in between. Controls. Admittedly, even though I can jokingly call EverGrace Jank Grace, I don't think it has much to do with the controls. In my opinion, the controls were pretty properly put together and laid out in a logical fashion. Moving around feels free, with the R1 and R2 buttons righting the ship if the camera gets out of whack, which I will touch on later. The circle button is used to dash, X to interact or get an item, square to attack, and triangle to use the Palmyra action. The right analog stick could be used to swap between primary and secondary weapons. L2 will bring up your Palmyra action menu to choose from. L1 could be set to use as a quick item such as a heal, and the menuing itself is pretty fluid and responsive. If you don't want to do a lot of these actions in the heat of the moment, like the quick use item button, you can always pause and go to the menu screen. And touching back on the movement, you do have the ability to use either the D-pad or the left analog stick to move, so that's pretty cool, whatever suits you best. For all the jank that EverGrace might bring, I surprisingly don't think it's in the form of controls. Sort of. Gameplay and fun factor. Alright, let's get into the fun stuff and the true meat of what makes EverGrace, EverGrace. To start off, the game has a pretty slick and valuable HUD. There's an in-game map to the upper right which can be very helpful in certain mazy areas. You have the HP and power gauge. The higher your HP, the longer it takes for your power gauge to replenish. Each time you attack or dash, the power gauge goes down. This is very similar to what was seen in games such as Kingsfield. The gauge will replenish when you rest, you'll obviously do more damage as it's higher, and so forth. As mentioned in the control section, you could set a registered item and see it in the HUD window and use it by pressing the L1 button. Nearby will be your status change area, which will alert you of ailments such as being poisoned or silenced. Just below that will be your Palmyra pieces collected, which serves as an in-game currency to buy and repair at the in-game shops. And lastly, on the bottom right is your Palmyra power section, which shows the resistance of each piece of equipment on Darius or Charlene. When Palmyra actions are activated, you sustain damage, or when time passes, these numbers will decrease, and when they reach 0, the equipment will break and cost an arm and a leg to repair, so be careful. Speaking of the shop, this could be accessed at the save point crystal pillars, which are littered throughout the journey. At the shop, you could buy, sell, and repair gear such as helmets, armor, boots, accessories, weapons, items, and creature notes. You'll find yourself here a lot, whether it's buying new gear, fixing your ornaments, or changing the colors of your equipment, which could serve as a fashion statement, or to help solve some in-game puzzles. There are quite a bit of puzzles throughout the EverGrace journey. I would say Charlene's quest has maybe a little bit more than Darius, but he certainly has his fair share as well. The majority of these puzzles are not what you think. Occasionally you'll have some where you simply have to find items to proceed, but a traditional action RPG puzzle system is not really what's present in EverGrace outside of some elemental style puzzling and perhaps the Darius Ice Cave puzzles. Many of the puzzles are solved by what you're wearing, not wearing, or brandishing. That reminds me, you could actually swap back and forth between Darius's quest and Charlene's quest. The cool thing is there's no need to. If you want, you can go full bore into Darius's story and finish it up, and then start Charlene's. Or you can go about it interchangeably, which is essentially what I did on my first run. I found this to be a pretty cool feature and it helps give some variety to the gameplay. Especially if you're in an area that you might not like, you could just swap over to the other hero and stomp around there for a bit. One of the cool things about EverGrace is how deep the mechanics can truly go and how much completionism is available. But the best part? You could opt to ignore a lot of things and just kind of slog your way through anyway at your own pace. A great example for me is, if I don't have to use Palmyra spells and whatnot, I really didn't. I realized that would have made things a lot easier for me in certain spots, but I've always been a very normal melee focused guy and I found that I was able to get through the majority of the game just fine playing like that. But obviously, don't always do as I do, okay? From the completionist standpoint, there are a ton of helmets, boots, armor, accessories, and weapons to be purchased at the store or found as drops from enemies. There are also these fruit items that can be dropped by enemies to increase your character's stats if you want to go on a max out stat spree. Mentioned earlier, there is a creature note that compiles creature data purchased from the shop, as well as an item book to document the aforementioned things that you might purchase or find, each of these giving a further breakdown on what's being broadcasted as you look through. There's even an optional challenge dungeon called, wait for it, Shadow Tower, that could be accessed by using a dark guidepost at a save crystal. This does provide great challenge. I'd say it's pretty similar to that of the sealed cave or labyrinth from Eternal Ring, which also, much like that, yields the FromSoft staple, Moonlight Sword at the end. Wrapping back around towards the combat, you have some main stats such as Strength, which deals with physical attack, Stamina, which raises your HP, Intelligence, which makes your magical powers more formidable, Resistance, which raises resistance to magic attacks and status abnormalities, and Luck, which raises the chance of better drops. Not only that, but you have attributes for slash weapons, like swords, blunt weapons, for weapons like clubs, and pierce for weapons such as spears, as well as the elemental categories such as lightning, tree, flame, and ice. Where this really comes into play is dealing with certain enemies. Enemies could legitimately be so resistant against certain types that they can get healed and not even harmed. I encountered this against one boss with Charlene in the Human Research Lab on my first run, which then prompted me to buck up for a different and better weapon. Said weaknesses or resistances will show above an enemy on screen, or they can be found in the creature notes. But again, the beauty here is that you can kind of just slog your way through anyway and not use too much brainpower if you don't want to. Or you can get super granular and be all about the resistance charts. For the most part, my strategies were a tried and true FromSoft staple: conserve the energy and stick to the booty. I touched on it earlier, but EverGrace will end up dropping you into a New Game Plus cycle upon completion, which for completionists or people that want to zip through once again, is really cool, as you restart the game with all of your acquired gear, making it easier to progress and tidy up those creature and item books. Lastly, the difficulty. This is always a topic of conversation when it comes to FromSoft. I didn't find EverGrace to be too difficult. Sure, there were some spots that could be tough or tricky, but I felt on the FromSoft style punishment scale, EverGrace ended up being a little bit lower than I expected, reserving a lot of his difficulty for morons like me that stink at puzzle solving, enemy resistance determination, or aptly, for the Secret Shadow Tower endgame dungeon. Critiques. I had a lot of people clamoring for EverGrace coverage, and for a FromSoft stan like myself, I was stoked beyond belief. With all that said, there were a bunch of things that didn't sit totally right with me with EverGrace, and let's get into them now. EverGrace fanboys, I'm sorry, please don't be too mad at me. I don't think I really like the soundtrack. I waffle back and forth on it, and I think I often end up in the meh mindset when all is said and done. I appreciate the fact that it was very out there and it tried something new, but when I try to compare it to the Kingsfield series or Eternal Ring, I don't think EverGrace deserves to even be in the same stratosphere of those titles in terms of a soundtrack. It's a bit too chaotic and janky for my tastes. If you like it, great, but not really for me. Aside from a few puzzles in the game, I wasn't a huge fan of most of them that were present in EverGrace. Far too many of the puzzles revolved around wearing or brandishing various equipment or doing a forced recolor of something, almost to kind of direct you towards the recoloring feature available at the shop. I don't know, I think I would have just greatly preferred more puzzles like that of the Ice Cave puzzle with Darius, and less of the equipment-centric ones. Now I want to get into my two biggest gripes that ultimately brought the game down quite a bit for me. First is I just straight up don't like a lot of the areas in the game. I really enjoyed the opening areas of the Royal Commons, Serenade Hill, and drifting into Darius's questline, the Rubain Castle, but a huge chunk of Charlene's quest with the Human Research Lab just didn't do it for me. I found that area in particular to be very boring, tedious, and time-consuming. Areas such as the Soaring Tower as well also didn't do it for me. Surprisingly, I actually really enjoyed the Abandoned Road area in Charlene's quest, which Online, apparently a lot of people didn't. But yeah, on the whole, I'd say I liked Darius's quest variety a little bit more, until, of course, the game made you go through the soaring tower and repeating a lot of the same exact areas that you may have already done with Charlene. I really wanted more variety and not the same stuff revisited across both quest lines. I guess this really is just a preference thing, but I just didn't like a lot of the areas in the game. They didn't click with me, and that was unfortunate. My biggest gripe with EverGrace is a word that I probably already uttered multiple times: jank. The game is pretty janky and it's hard to deny. The soundtrack is janky. Combat can feel very janky at times. While the controls themselves are good, the camera can be janky as all hell and super annoying in certain spots and situations. It's kind of tough to explain. At times EverGrace feels very polished, but then at the same time it feels very unpolished. And admittedly, the further that I got along on my quest, I was kind of just hoping for the end to come. Which I think also led to me wanting to fully postpone the Shadow Tower dungeon for a rainy day, as I fear in the interim I've been all EverGraced out. In summation, as always, I absolutely love being able to dive into my enormous backlog and give games a fair shot. Being a huge FromSoftware fan, EverGrace had my interest piqued from afar for quite some time. So I am eternally thankful for those that voted in the poll to let me play and cover this title. While I don't think EverGrace is a bad game by any means, there were a lot of things that just didn't jive with me. I keep circling back, but EverGrace is just a bit too janky, rough around the edges, and featured too many blah portions of the game for me. For this one to be up in the bits and glories certified, rarefied air of Kingsfield Eternal Ring or Shadow Tower. And obviously I realize EverGrace is a third-person RPG and not a first-person RPG, but still. I do plan on revisiting EverGrace in the future for possibly a Retro Achievements run, or at the very least conquering the Shadow Tower portion of the game, but not for a while. I give EverGrace on the PS2 a 6 out of 10. If you've enjoyed this review, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing if you haven't already. If you want to see my first ever playthrough of EverGrace, check out the pinned comment, description, or end screen, as well as other FromSoftware content. Hope you enjoyed, and take care.